Good morning. Thanks for staying with us on Money FM 89.3. I'm Ryan Huang. The clock is ticking as we count down to September 13th. That's when Singapore's next presidential election is due. Ahead of that, Senior Minister and Coordinating Minister for Social Policies, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, has announced his decision to put himself forward to run for the coveted role and retire from politics. So have a listen.
This is different because it's not a political contest. Unlike general elections I've been through, this is not a political contest. This is about choosing the right person, but I still make no assumptions about my chances. I put myself forward to serve to the best of my ability, using all my experience in economics, in finance, in international affairs, and the standing I have internationally. I put myself forward to serve Singaporeans in this new role, not a political role, but a different one that has to be above politics. It has to be above politics. And I feel the time is now right for me to serve in this role.
Well, this decision will end Mr. Tharman's service in the Singapore Cabinet for more than 2 decades. Well, for a deeper analysis, we're joined by former nominated Member of Parliament Eugene Tan, who is also Associate Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University. Good morning, Eugene. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, Ryan. Morning, Sean.
Always awesome to have you in the show to talk about some of the moves that are happening in politics. So, are you surprised by Mr. Tharman's decision?
I was, simply because he is someone who is very closely connected, with the ruling party. And I think looking at the political climate in Singapore, particularly among young people, I think there is a growing sense that perhaps, the president should be someone, who is not from the establishment in order for him or her to proper check and balance, but overall, I think it comes to me as a pleasant surprise, and I think it will add to the presidential contest. It will add to the office of the presidency if Mr. Tharman were to win.
Yeah, I think maybe you can expand on that, not from the establishment, because based on previous...
here we are looking at, Mr. Tharman, who is now the senior minister, and prior to that, was the deputy prime minister, someone who has been contested under the PAP ticket since 2001. And prior to that, long service in the public sector, particularly in the Monetary Authority of Singapore. But I think one could also say that his background actually gives him, a lot of expertise and experience, in how the government functions. And one could imagine that he would go into the role rather seamlessly, but at the same time also, be able to keep the government on its toes, right? Because he would know the ins and outs of government. He would know what can be done, what cannot be done. And so I would imagine, that when the government in presenting a decision that requires the president to sign off, they will have to be very careful. They have to be even more meticulous, to make sure that it all adds up, to the recommendation that the government is putting forth.
And of course, you actually had an interaction with him or a chance to meet him in person when you were in Parliament yourself as an MP between 2012 and 2014. What's your impression of him? How would you describe Mr. Tharman? I
would describe him as, your gentleman politician. And why do I say that? I think he treated every member of Parliament with respect, right? Whether you are a new MP or whether you are a veteran MP, whether you are from the ruling party or whether you're from the opposition or whether you are unaffiliated, that we NMPs are. So when you look at how he fielded parliamentary questions, it was really about, trying to put the answer as clearly as possible, right? Not seeking to gain any political advantage, never mind, right? If the MP posing the question, was trying to make some political point. If you look in terms of, his budget statements, right? When I was NMP, he was the finance minister. Being able to get across government policies, in that clear manner, very articulate, but also, seeking to persuade Singaporeans, why we have to do more, with less, why we may have to tax more, for example. So I think when you look at his being in Parliament, I think, he demonstrated all the best qualities, that a politician should have, that in the end, Parliament is about a platform in which all MPs, should strive, for the betterment of Singapore and Singaporeans.
Yeah, so it sounds like he embodies a lot of these positive traits, and
Indeed.
You're really painting a picture of someone who is, quite formidable in terms of being a contender, or at least running for the presidency. So we haven't heard from anyone else about their intentions to run for presidency. So let's talk about what might happen with the potential competition. Are we likely to see anyone come forth, especially from the private sector? Anyone who might be gutsy enough to stand up?
Ryan, I hope there'll be someone with the gumption, right, and the guts, to put forth. And I'm not saying that this is someone who is reckless, right? I mean, yes, Mr. Tharman is a formidable candidate, but we must also remember that someone who is not from the establishment, right, who meets the eligibility requirements, would bring something different to the table, right? A different perspective, new ways of looking at an issue, perhaps not so persuaded, that the government is doing right. I think that would be good, in terms of the custodial functions that the elected president has to play. So if we have, a hopeful who now looks at, Mr. Tharman is running, so I'm not going to win, so I'm going to sit out, I think that would be disappointing. I think that it should be someone who feels that, he or she brings something different to the table, that he or she is persuaded that he or she is equal to the task, and that you'd be good for Singaporeans, to give all candidates a fair hearing and for them to decide, who they think would be best suited, to be at Istana.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Bring something new to the table. But here's what they are up against. Mr. Tharman has previously served as Deputy PM, Finance and Education Minister. He comes with 2 decades and more, actually, of experience as a politician. He's also held important past global appointments as, for example, the first Asian chair of the IMFC, or the International Monetary and Financial Committee. So quite a long CV and impressive one as well. So we're going to jump the gun a bit. If he is elected, how much weight would that bring to Singapore's international standing, for example?
I think it will be a tremendous boost. All our presidents, including President Halimah Yacob, has worked very hard to put Singapore on the international stage, through their visits, because the president is effectively Singapore's chief diplomat. But I would imagine that someone in the mold of Mr. Tharman, given his vast expertise and experience, that we would have many world leaders seeking to tap his brains, seek his insights on matters which, he has a lot of expertise, right? Fiscal, economic, monetary matters. And I think for Singapore as a small state, it is important, for our leaders, including the president, to be able to project Singapore's voice, as a voice of reason, to remind the world at large, that the concerns and interests of small states, need to be taken into account, to be considered, to be given fair judgment. So I would say that, someone with the stature of Mr. Tharman, will certainly add to our diplomatic reach. And I think that's increasingly important, right, in a world that is more turbulent geopolitically, particularly in this part of Asia.
Yeah, we were chatting off air earlier, and you mentioned the word counterintuitive. I'm just wondering if you can unpack how different his background is, and also what's similar to past presidents, because as we all know, he is quite closely linked to the PAP after going through 2 decades in various roles. So in terms of optics, what will people take away from him being president if he is elected?
Well, I say his counterintuitive choice, simply because as a politician, he would be aware of the political sentiments, about who should be the elected president, right? And I think when you look at young people today, I think there is a strong view that the president should preferably be someone not from the establishment. And so for someone like Mr. Tharman to put his name forward, I think that in a way goes against what I would describe as, the common intuition. But I think if he runs and if he gets elected, I think he will be an important marker, because the president is not a political office. It is a non-partisan office, and it will also demonstrate to Singaporeans, that in the end, we need to look at the person, right, his or her suitability for the job, and that includes being able to be his or her own person, being able to stand up against the government, particularly when he or she will have the mandate of the people. So I hope that in the end, we look beyond labels, we look beyond party affiliations, and instead to see, what someone brings to the office. And I think this is where hopefully, we will be able to not judge a book by its cover, so to speak, but to look at what each candidate brings to the table.
Yeah, talking about bringing things to the table, the value, right, of him being in that role, what will be the potential synergies that might be coming forth as he works with the 4G leadership? When you think about how there's, in this sense, a change of guard, new leaders coming up, what will be the type of dynamics that they will possibly look at to foster? And also when you look at his relinquishing of some roles, who will be stepping up to take over some of these roles?
Yeah, I think when I would anticipate that the 4G leadership, would be keen to tap on Mr. Tharman's expertise and experience. I mean, looking at the dynamics between, the PAP leadership when I was NMP and subsequently after that, I think there's tremendous of respect, for Mr. Tharman, particularly his independence of mind, his ability to look at things afresh, so whether you look at things like the idea of our social safety net, not just as a net but as a trampoline, or about our meritocracy, likening it to in a way like an escalator, a lifelong meritocracy. I think these are new ways of looking at fundamental policies. So I think I would imagine, that the 4G leadership, will consult him, and that, in his capacity as president, when he has regular meetings with the prime minister, that he would also be very forthright in putting forth his views. And of course, all this will not be known in the public, but I think, he will certainly want to consult, to be consulted. He will certainly want to counsel, to advise, to caution, which is what, most constitutional case of state would do. I don't think that we will find someone from the 4G, who would be able to step up to all, the multi-faceted roles that Mr. Tharman has played. We must remember that when Mr. Tharman came into politics in 2001, he wasn't that finished product, if I could put it that way. He wasn't that statesman that he is today. So I would expect that, we will have 4G leaders, who will take on the roles that he will be relinquishing, and that they will have to measure up. There's a steep learning curve, but I see no reason why they would not be able to step up. In a way, it would be an indication of how robust our system of political succession and renewal is. So hopefully the system will continue, right, to be able to throw up more leaders, in the mold of Mr. Tharman.
Right. Well, in conversation with former NMP Eugene Tan, who's also Associate Professor of Law at SMU. Now let's take a quick look back at our current president, Madam Halimah Yacob, who is Singapore's first female president. So looking back at a 6-year term, Eugene, what would you say are some of the most notable and impressionable moments for you from her term?
Well, for me, Madam Halimah has brought, unparalleled energy, to the presidency. Despite, the COVID-19 pandemic, she was very active, in supporting particularly community causes that have not received the particular attention, right? So whether it's issues such as mental health, people with disabilities, the vulnerable, the marginal communities in our society. So I think that reinforces the role of the president, as a symbol of national unity and as a unifying figure. We also remember Madam Halimah, for making those critical decisions, right, relating to her custodial powers over our national reserves, right?
During COVID-19, of course.
Correct. So if you recall, she approved, close to 100 billion Singapore dollars, to enable Singapore, to protect lives and to protect livelihoods. Now, these are weighty decisions. We don't get to see the sort of debate that goes on behind closed doors between her Council of Presidential Advisors, and the government. Getting this mechanism to put in place that sort of fiscal power, to ensure that we will come out stronger after the pandemic. I think these were very critical decisions. So finally, I think Madam Halimah brought that common touch, showing that, we should not judge a person based on his or her looks, right? So, here we have, a Muslim woman, tudung wearing, being able to interact with people from all walks of life, whether you're talking about kings and queens, right down to the ordinary person. I think, that adds so much a desirable quality, to the office of head of state, and in her various roles, constitutionally, community, and ceremonial, right? So I think I would say that she will be missed, for the way she brought that common touch, to the office.
Yeah, I think that's been reflected in the tributes that have come forth for her term in office. And just to wrap things up, we've got the process of the presidential election set to begin, and that will begin when the Prime Minister issues the writ of election. So, of course, we can't let you go without asking that million-dollar question. When will the presidential election likely be held? Will it be after National Day?
It will have to be. I hope so, right? Because I think the month of August, as the government had previously indicated, should be dedicated to commemorating Singapore's independence. Now, while the presidential election is not a political contest, so you wouldn't have, that sort of trading of barbs or criticisms or angsty, political calls and all. I think it would be nice, for August to be dedicated to commemorating Singapore's independence. So I would say that the writ of election, would probably be issued in August itself, but the actual process, the cut and thrust of campaigning, in a very different way from parliamentary elections, that the bulk of it will take place in September. Now, I think it's possible that elections could be held after, polling day itself could be after Madam Halimah has stepped down from office, so which means that in a very short interim period, there could be an acting president. But I think certainly we can look at September. I don't think it would be in July because, that's really too soon. So I think all signs, to my mind, point to nomination day being in September with polling day as well in the second half of September.
Definitely a lot to look forward to, and we are looking forward to catching up with you again when that happens, Eugene.
Thank you for having me.
Former NMP Eugene Tan, who's also Associate Professor of Law at SMU. Thanks for your time again, Eugene.
Thank you.